good afternoon.
All right.
Thank God it's raining. People came inside to hear us.
I like that.
Well, you're used to that up in Seattle, though, aren't you?
This feels like home. Thank you for making me feel welcome.
Well, we turned the sprinklers on for about an hour, John. 50 years ago, I came down to Santa Monica from Bellevue, where I grew up, near where you live now, and we came to this hotel, and I just remember that iconic Morton Bay fig tree out there. It really struck me. So this is still the same beautiful location, and always brings a certain joy to come back here. But I was kind of wide-eyed. I had no idea what California would be like. That was my first trip down here as a young kid, as we were going to move down here. But John, it's nice to have you here. Thank you for joining us. For those who don't know John, he's Vice President of the Global Specialist and Go-to-Market Organization, AWS. And what does that mean? Well, AWS does a lot of things, but go-to-market's a very important role there, and he has a lot of senior level responsibility at AWS. He's known for identifying tech businesses that will hit the billion-dollar mark, identifying them early and helping them scale from pre-revenue past the $1 billion mark. He's done that over a dozen times. We've had the pleasure of working with him on a number of companies. In 2015, we were just 10 years ago, we launched March Capital, and we built everything on the cloud. And not only that, we built everything on Amazon and AWS. And Andy came down 2015. 2014, we had Werner Vogel down. And it wasn't a consensus at that time to build everything on the cloud. There was still enterprise software, on-prem. And we thought, we're going to do everything on the cloud. We're going to pretty much do everything on AWS. And it's been a great partnership for us. I think our portfolio companies will do over $2 billion of business this year on AWS. And but as much as that sounds like it's great for you, it's been amazing for us because you've allowed our companies to scale in an incredible way that they was not. We thought it was possible, obviously, when we started it, but it's just been incredible. Remember going to Zurich and giving a talk in 2016 about what we're planning to do with CrowdStrike and scaling companies, and people there didn't believe me, and it's just been amazing. And thank you, and thank AWS and all your team for just being such a reliable partner for us. So on the theme of building billion-dollar businesses, I know you built the Gen AI business at AWS, which is a big theme of today, as well as many others. Maybe you could share some insights of when you kind of saw the inkling of Gen AI breaking out and, thought it was going to be big, and how big, and when did you start to really focus on it?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So first, thank you for the invitation. The event last night was amazing. Congratulations on the 10th anniversary.
That's my guest house. I just opened it up to you guys. Yeah.
We appreciate, all of us appreciate that.
You should see the main house.
Well, the drinks were good, so thank you. It's been really interesting. I don't know that any of us can go back 3 or 4 years and say we knew this was coming outside of some of the folks that were building the core technology. I joined AWS after you made the contrarian decision to go make a big bet there with your companies and help them scale. I joined 6 years ago. And so at the time when I joined, it's just a very different world, and we'll talk about that, I think, a little bit. But back then, nobody had ever run HPC in the cloud, and you weren't running anything at scale in the cloud. Yeah. And so one of the first things I did was, and our team did, is we went and built the HPC business, and we proved that it was possible to run at scale in the cloud.
HPC, high performance
computing, just building supercomputers, basically, massive capacity at scale. Thank you for that. And we really started to figure out, okay, well, that's not enough. Which are the industries that are going to really benefit from this, where we can break out and help them scale and be successful, which was your original thesis. And one of the first ones back in 2018, many of you will remember, was when self-driving cars, specifically autonomous vehicles, started coming out. And they all had to run these simulations and drive simulated models at scale. And so preceding AI, which by the way, we've just seen this pattern emerge over and over, not at the scale that it's at right now, is just where do these founders need lots of capacity to do really hard math and do it in as close to real time as possible? And so autonomous vehicle simulation was one. About 3 years ago, I was the executive sponsor for Anthropic, did that deal with Tom and the team, as well as Ahmad at Stability and Clement Hugging Face, and we've just enjoyed really strong partnerships. But I would say back then, I don't know that we knew this was going to look like what it did. It just looked like another application where customers needed to build really big, fast supercomputers to do hard math. And yeah, so we got to see a little bit of early signal in that respect, and it turned into what it is. And I don't know that any of us saw this coming at scale, but we were really fortunate to be positioned there with technology to enable.
There's always a confluence of things, but there was sort of a Sputnik moment last year, a little over a year ago, wasn't there?
There was.
Yeah. And
so actually, one of the things that you and I talked about this, one of the things that was really challenging for us is identifying some of that early signal and where to double down and where to invest and where to stop doing what we've been doing. And your team and I conspired actually to ask you a couple questions because you've been playing moderator the whole time. And so some of the folks are actually interested in.
It's clever if you don't know what you're doing to moderate. Yeah.
Well, we get signal. We get signal pretty early because customers use us or they don't, and they grow pretty fast or they don't. And a lot of my job is about identifying that early signal, but you have to make decisions on that before they ever get to me.
Yeah.
Frankly. And so just curious, on behalf of me and some of the folks in the audience, how do you think about that, especially in this chaotic environment where it's hard enough to identify that signal where I sit? It's almost impossible to do that where you sit.
Yeah, well, yeah, I wish I had a good answer for that. I don't know. Early in my career, I don't think I've shared this very much. I trained as an intelligence analyst, and I would look at signals to noise, and I would look at large sets of data and try and figure out what was significant, what wasn't, and look for signs, for early detection of bad things that might happen, and what were the leading indicators historically, and also daily. I'd give the morning intelligence briefing to the head of the Navy, and get up early, go in, and I go, let's just skip Africa today, nothing going on. And we go around the world and let's focus on this, and you realize you're applying a series of laws that you have or templates and I remember in chemistry, you talk about physics, chemistry, biology. There's all these laws, dialectic materialism. Boyle's law of chemistry is always really interesting because it's always. I probably won't get this quite exactly right, but the most important compound is not always the largest compound. It's the one that's the most dynamic, the most fastest growing, the one that's expanding the fastest. So you sort of look within an entity and you say, all right, where's the dynamicism? Where do you see the customer engagement, the use patterns, has it made the transition from engineering to product? And, is there some signals in there? And Al Ramadan talked a little bit about it this morning in Play Bigger. What years 2 or 3 kind of where we come in? What are you seeing going on there that's unique? And we kind of mull that over. We just keep messing, pawing all over it, looking at turning it upside down, looking at it. And sometimes you can get false positives, right? Or you can get false negatives. And false negatives are worse than a false positive. Mm-hmm. I think our biggest errors in life are errors of omission, right? Where you dismiss something which you should have done. I don't think we go through life. I don't go through life regretting things I did. Most of us don't go through life regretting things we did. Usually regret things we didn't do, right? And so you have to be careful not to get a false negative. Like you say, oh, that's not going to work because of this. You never do anything, right? So you have to be optimistic. So you got to look at it and see, I think this is happening here. How do we go a little bit further? And you go out and you spend time, and you go talk to the users, and so it's hard work, right? It's a lot of reading, it's a lot of engagement, it's a lot of talking to users and reference calls, and then sometimes you just go, no, it's not ready, it's not scalable, it's not a big enough market. There's usually there's filters that you put on it, or it's too early, so. I don't know. I don't know if I answered the question, but you got to do the work, right? And you have to be open-minded. You have to be willing to be, change your mind about things. So Spot and I, we work every day, and then we get together on Saturdays, and then we catch up again on Sundays, and we go back to work on Mondays,
Yes.
And everyone's like, oh, you guys are really synced up while we, our wives think probably spend too much time together, but we're thinking about this stuff. Like, what are you seeing there that I'm not seeing, and what's that customer saying? What's the time to value, and how are they using that product? So we're trying to get that early engagement. Now, look, that's probably for a Series B, C type deal, 2 to 5 years in. If it's really early, it's a bigger bet. You're just looking for a huge opportunity where you can build something fresh. Like you heard Ashish Vaswani speak over the last day or two where we're building a company from scratch. Ashish wrote the original paper at Google that invented transformer technology. You guys know him well. You know, without him, ChatGPT doesn't exist. What's next on the long road to AI? We'll take play a long ball there, right? Mm-hmm. Occasionally we'll do something like that. We'll start a company from scratch, but usually you're kind of, we're into it enough where there's some signals.
Well, it's a small world. I think I can't count the number of times where I talked to Ashish and asked him how it was going, and his response was, great, I just finished talking to Jamie. So it's a very small world, and your team does a really good job asking follow-up questions. Some of them are obvious, and some of them aren't. One of them I remember Chris Urmson was the founder and CTO at Waymo, and he was one of the earliest companies building autonomous vehicles, and he had just raised some crazy amount, $500 million, and I was trying to figure out where he was going to spend the money on autonomous vehicles because they weren't allowed on the road yet. And finally, he was walking me through his plans, and he said, well, I basically have to spend it running simulations. And I said, Chris, doesn't that mean you have to turn around and hand all that to me and spend it on compute? And he said, well, and he laughed, and he said, kind of. And I thought, okay, well, we should probably get into the autonomous vehicles business. So some of those are a little earlier and easier in terms of signal than others.
Well, so that's one of your cases about early signals of success. So you get past the signals of traction, and when you start to see something break out, that's where we usually double down. Where have you seen that breakout? I know number one, we had a CrowdStrike. The Salesforce likes to take credit for everything they do. And one weekend, GE bought some CrowdStrike bought some on the Amazon AWS store with credits from their compute and downloaded it, and it was a couple $100,000 purchase. And everyone went, wow, they bought it and downloaded it and installed it. No one talked to them. I mean, it was incredible. That was about 2015, 2016, and that was like, this actually works, Then American Express. I think they pushed the wrong button, and we ended up installing, 300,000 nodes in an hour, which we never thought would happen. We were going to do it in installments, and we did it all at once.
That's when I get phone calls.
And it worked. You guys delivered it all. It worked. I mean, so these were like, wow, it's scalable. Wow, people go to market. But what are some of the signs that you see of success?
Yeah, look, some of them are different than what you look at and your team looks at. I think some of them are very similar. In terms of being self-service, we ask the same things you do. Is this a people business? Is it a software business? Can it scale? One of the things that we really focus on is, again, like you, addressable market, customer interest. We spend a lot of time. A lot is made of formal go-to-market, right? Being formal partners, being in marketplace, or for any partnership, the formal mechanisms. The informal mechanisms ahead of that really make partnerships, and so we spend a lot of time, including with, and especially with your portfolio companies, making early introductions, and how's the design partner conversation going? And then the last one I'll say probably, again, not that dissimilar from what you look at is team focus. And especially in a time of chaos, it's really easy to chase a lot. There are a lot of problems to solve. And so finding teams really maniacally focused on solving a problem that has value, that can be replicated at scale is a big one.
You want to pull up that slide for me, Tony? Because companies can kind of plod along until they really focus. This is a sample of us, of some of our portfolio companies. You see kind of years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're starting to go along in revenue, and then usually they asymptote up. Years 5 through 10 is where most of the value creation is. Usually about 7 is when they go public, and case after case. And this is all these companies were built on AWS. Just thank you. And you're welcome. And it's a relationship, right? And the so great. These are well-known companies: Snowflake, CrowdStrike. Now, I guess the question I'd have: we have some new companies. Generate. You probably heard from today. Great company, changing drug discovery. What's going to change with Gen AI? Will this slope be steeper, do you think? Will they ramp quicker? Will there be this transition from engineering to product more quickly? What are when we come up here 5 years ago, we look back on today,
Yeah.
this is great, right? We're one of the top investors in the world, fantastic. World's changing. What's this going to look like? Yeah.
Yes, so some things haven't changed. We've had smart people for a really long time. We've had access to capital for a really long time. Mike Milken yesterday told me you like slides, so I'm going to see your slide and raise you a slide.
Okay, excellent.
Okay. Do we have it?
Slide wars.
Okay, so two big things with my hat on in terms of enabling technology and really unlocking the potential of Gen AI. Two things are happening right now that have never happened before in history. The first one is the amount of capacity and the size effectively of computers available to do math for these really hard problems is expanding exponentially. And so we don't have infinite capacity yet, and we don't have infinite computational ability yet, but compared to 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, we're pretty close, right? And so that's one thing that's happening. You can see here, it's not necessarily that the models are getting bigger. That's the dependent variable. The independent variable is how big are these supercomputers, basically, that the AI models run on? And if you look at the top 10, top 100 supercomputing runs from 10 years ago, almost none of them were AI models. If you look today, probably directionally half of the top supercomputers in the world are AI-driven and AI models. So that's number one, is we actually have the capacity or the tools to go really fast. So that's number one. And the next slide, I told you I'd raise you a slide, so I do have one more. The time compression to be able to innovate is shrinking to zero. So this is one indicator, and it's from the high-performance computing world or the supercomputer world. But back to the beginning of time when people were building these big compute clusters, it's taken an average of 6 to 8 years to build them. You have to design it, you have to build it, you have to sweat the assets for 5+ years. And with the cloud and with a lot of other things, not just hardware, but software and networking, between 2015 and 2020, you kind of see the cloud era emerging, and the amount of time that it would take to build something to support this Gen AI workload has approached zero. And we are effectively at zero now in terms of time to stand up a supercomputer. By the way, that's not just a technology comment. We've had the ability to do this pretty quickly for a long time. It's also an operating comment, and it's also a commercial construct. So we released, just give you a quick example, probably a product with the least sexiest name in product history called EC2 capacity blocks. But what that is you can turn up a supercomputer and hand it back the next day to us. And that's really incredible. So we're at this confluence of this exponential wave of growth where people can start to ask, and I talked to Mike yesterday, what would be possible if I had access to infinite computing power in real time?
And one of those 12-year-old kids in India is going to do something special. John, I'm going to leave you for 4 great entrepreneurs. I'm going to come up and join you on stage. Thank you.
Great, fantastic.
Thanks for being such a great partner.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for the partnership. Okay, well, we'll just do, we've got about 30 minutes. We'll just do a quick round of introductions. I think I've met all of you before and worked very closely with some of you. Jason, maybe we'll start with you and work our way this way. Quick introduction and a little bit about your company.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jason. I'm one of the co-founders at Poolside. Before Poolside, I was an investor for a couple of years, and before that, I was a CTO at GitHub for 4 years. So 2 years pre-Microsoft acquisition, 2 years post. Poolside is effectively just the world's first AI specifically focused on software development, building a foundation model, platform, and applications for it. You can go on-prem, we can go in VPC, air-gapped environments, but we basically want to make this enterprise ready to fine-tune a customer's data.
My turn. Gustavo Zaposnik, I'm the founder and CEO of ASAP. We have a very simple mission, ending call centers as a thing. The world spends hundreds of billions of dollars in call centers. People hate calling. We want to make that go away.
Hi, my name is Margaret Ann. I lead the product team at StatSig, which is a feature flagging, experimentation, and analytics company based out of Seattle, Washington. I actually think a big chunk of the panel flew down from Seattle.
Yes.
Before
we brought the rain, by the way.
I was going to say, sorry.
Sorry about that.
Before StatSig, I was in big tech at Uber and Facebook for about 10 years.
Great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vipul Vedprakash, co-founder and CEO of Together AI. Together AI is a full-stack, high-performance, production-ready platform for open source models. The way, one of the ways I think about it is frontier model companies are building their developer platforms for their models. We are doing it for open source and everything else.
Awesome. All right. Well, so thank you for joining us up on stage. You all are the founders that all of us are talking about that are changing the world. So super excited to have you here. Jason, I'm going to start with you. Jamie and I have talked about my perspective, identifying signal on where we should double down and invest. Jamie's perspective on where he should invest and lean into support companies. Your decision starting a company is much more binary than that. He and I get to take portfolio approaches. You get to go all in on something. So I've known your team for a long time. I know Nat really well. How did you decide this was the thing in the universe of things that you could go do?
So I've been building developer tool stuff, focusing on developers for the past, 15, 20 years, essentially. And then there's a world of opportunity that sits there. You can say, what do you do? What do you not do? And at the end of the day, what I have done is build platforms, the world's largest platforms that focus on developers. And when you start to see what's going to be possible in the next couple of years via these foundation model companies, you understand that the wave of things that are going to happen in the world will look very different than last time and the time before that. I basically took my 75-year-old self moment, which was, I would regret not going in on this, and particularly because I was sitting on the sideline, looking at investing in Anthropic, literally looking at investing in Anthropic, thinking I need to get out and build something like this as opposed to invest in it. And also, investing for one side of the fence is like brushing my teeth with my left hand, and building is like brushing my teeth with my right hand, and focusing on developers. But it was a long conversation with my wife, because after GitHub, she told me to never go back to work for a Silicon Valley-based company again, because there's stories involved with GitHub. But I told her it would be different this time, which is famous last words.
Well, that's a good question. Everyone should ask you about over drinks, and I won't ask you to divulge that here. Margaret Ann, you've spent time at some pretty big companies. Jamie and I were actually talking about scaling and how important that is, and that oftentimes is the difference between companies finding product market fit and being successful or not. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so ironically, going from big tech to a startup, you actually have to do the opposite of scaling. You have to scale down and learn how to build at a smaller scale and do unscalable things. I think I was used to operating in a world where there was so much data and so many just resources that you could kind of do anything in real time, deploy a feature in hours or in a matter of days, reach significance, make a decision, move on to the next thing. And when you're building a startup 0 to 1, it's very different, right? You start with literally 0 customers. The first couple of customers that come in, you're thrilled they're there, and you want to talk to them. You want to call them up and ask them, what's good, what's not good. And so I think the journey has been a little bit of the opposite. It's been scaling down, learning how to do customer outreach, have one-on-one Slack channels with customers, where we build the product for them. We ask them, what's your use case? How can we enable that? It's things that won't scale when you reach AWS size, but that's what you need to do to go 0 to 1, and I think it looks very different going 0 to 1 versus 100 million to $1 billion.
And what learnings maybe did you bring with you that can help with some of that prioritization?
Yeah, fundamentally customers are the same, right? Whether your company is huge and reaches millions of people or it's small, and you're just getting started. And I think customers want to feel valued. They want to feel heard. And so the more mechanisms that you have, whether it's reaching out to them, surveying them, talking to them one-on-one, or using data to drive those decisions and seeing the aggregate trends and then pinpointing, okay, here are the individuals driving those aggregate trends. It's all kind of the same, right? And so it's a mix of quant and qual and just seeing your customers for who they are.
Yeah, good. Gustavo, you're building at the application layer. Last year, we saw a lot of experimentation with LLMs. We saw a lot of POCs. There's still an ongoing debate about open source versus closed model versus vertically integrated. How do you think about the cocktail underneath what you're building, and what are some of the trade-offs you've made?
Yeah, we've had the fortune of seeing some of this several years ago. We put in production the first generative language model that had a human in the loop attached to it in late 2015, before the moniker of generative AI and language models were broadly used. It was a much smaller model than the models we train today, but we've been in the game of building that capability, getting supervision for humans, building the interfaces to collect usage from humans for many, many years. So today we're in an interesting position where we've collected a lot of data and we have the capacity of training larger models so we can do more and more things, which is a very good thing.
Yeah, well, call centers have been in the headlines. There's actually been a lot of discussion over the last couple of days on the panels in terms of labor displacement and efficiency gains, and your use case sits at the center of that a little bit. So as the CEO and the founder, how do you think about that? And how would you like all of the rest
So
of
I have a pragmatic perspective and again, venture into a more philosophical perspective. The pragmatic perspective is this is happening, period. There used to be elevator operators, we don't have them anymore. There used to be horse carriage drivers, we don't have them anymore. There used to be switchboard operators and textile workers. And there's a long list of jobs that for some periods of time exist, and then either technology or something else happens and they go away. Call centers specifically, as mundane as they sound or uninteresting, is roughly 3% of the US workforce. Our perspective is between tomorrow and 5 years from now, they won't exist. None of them. They'll go the way of elevator operators. So the pragmatic answer is that is happening, and that's what it is. The more philosophical perspective would be, is that a good thing? And I would say it is a misuse of human potential to have someone pick up phone calls for a problem they didn't help create, get scream about it, not be served in a good way in terms of being enabled to deal with it. So it is not a good use of, that person should go be a nurse or a teacher or something else. There's better uses for human beings than working in call centers.
Yeah, but so as part of your motion and the customers that you talk to, you must get asked, okay, well, what am I going to do with all these people, or how do I reskill them or upskill them?
This particular problem has a very interesting feature, which is average attrition is 100% per year. So actually no one needs to fire anybody, they just need to stop rehiring, and it's all good.
That's funny.
It's
That's
actually
an interesting
true.
perspective. It's very pragmatic.
Yeah.
Even the pragmatic award. That is very pragmatic. Jason, you're a little bit on the other end of the labor spectrum in that you're enabling developers in a way oftentimes that they've never been enabled before. I don't know that anybody thinks developers are going away, but where they spend their time and how they're productive probably is changing a lot.
I mean, I definitely think so. I think, to describe it this way, which is, there's a set of developers that will always exist in the world, development tasks will always exist in the world, but the relationship with the job or the function or even some of the mundane aspects of it will change, and they should change, and they have changed over time, so it's a continual evolution. But I like to use a different type of analogy, which is when I first got to GitHub, I was carrying it around, and I can't find it anymore, and it kind of haunts me that I can't find this, but a cutout of an ad from the 1920s in the newspaper, which said, some job needed, only requirement must be able to read and write. Now, that's silly to us today. The world literacy rates are through the roof, and everyone can read and write, and it's not exactly a differentiatable task at this point, that you can read or write. It's not something we talk about. And yet there's still editors, and there's still authors, and there's still people who have varying degrees of skill in this. So if software goes that way, and it kind of goes to where most people can create some aspect of pieces of software in the world, just like they would, just like they can simply read and simply write, but they're still specialists, that feels about right for what it's going to do. More people will be able to create a lot of different things in the world. And we already see this with Canva and Wix and Webflow and other things, which 10 years ago, you still needed to hire an agency to go do on websites. So we already know that this is going to happen. It's just to the degree of which it is. Do I think that what we do displaces kernel developers or people who are building AWS or even internals of Poolside or together? No, those types of infrastructure developers exist for reasons and likely will, and even portions of them though will go away. I like to pick on Java as my favorite. Well, actually, I like to pick on JavaScript now because JavaScript is the new Java. But there is so much ceremony involved with writing Java that a lot of that ceremony is boilerplate that should go away and get out of the way of the developer focusing on the real task at hand, not writing 4 different files to do 1 line code change.
Yeah. It's interesting as we look at the labor markets changing. Jamie and Mike Milken had a really interesting panel yesterday just about human capital and how it's porting around the world. I happen to have a son who's a computer science major at UC Irvine just down the road here and had a chance to visit with him. And over the last summer, I had, in my division, about 100 interns come through. And as I walked through, they just work differently than the rest of us work. So they would have their laptop up, they would have some form of LLM off to the right, they would have some form of Copilot off to the left. And I think our mental image of that is, okay, well, that's how the future of technology and technical team members looks. which is true, but I would say half my team was non-technical, and they still operated that way. And it'll be super interesting, I think 90 days from now, the first wave of Gen AI native undergrads is going to hit the market. And how should we think about that? Vipul, maybe I'll start with you on that one, and the new skills that are coming.
I think this will just be extremely commonplace. We will develop expertise in being able to wield these tools in the right ways. I also sort of see this trend. It's already starting to happening where we are moving from these assistive functions of AI to more delegative functions of AI. So I think there is, extremely good news for productivity. We are, one person can now direct AI system to do a lot more work than they could do before. I also think that there is a sense of it will change a little bit in how you learn and what you learn. We've written systems that together where we did not know this programming language. We sort of had an idea of what we wanted to do, but we had no deep expertise in the system, and the LM can just help us do that. So I think it'll eventually kind of change the epistemology of how we go about creating the information and skills that we have.
Well, a big part of your focus too is decentralizing and helping companies deploy models over time, which probably is going to look much different 5 years from now than it does today. How do you think about that journey and helping customers stay in front of that?
I think it's really sort of compute bound today. In Together's business, as soon as we have more computation, it gets immediately utilized, and we really focus a lot on breaking down the systems into their component parts and thinking about how each portion will scale with number of users, with the amount of data that is being put into the memory context of these models, with the number of different types of models that we are running. Because we are an open source platform, we orchestrate hundreds and thousands of models at the same time, and that again requires systems work and thinking about how this will happen. 5 years is a long time.
This 5 years, 5 months right now is a really long time.
Exactly, and I think being dynamic, we are very research focused and research oriented, so we do try to predict what's going to happen or try to invent some of that. I think that's important.
Yeah, it's been actually really great over the last couple of days to talk to all the founders that are here. It's a really nice mix of investors and founders and just the whole ecosystem. But maybe for the panel, I had a couple founders I spoke with say, hey, we have a really strong research team. Also, research teams can get wedded to the thing that they built and get really proud of it. And in an industry that's moving so fast, tools are going to continue to pop up all of the time, where a technology that didn't exist 6 months ago, so your team had to build something, now can get displaced by something that's more of a commodity. How do you think about giving your teams permission to sunset what they did and adopt new tools in the name of working on the differentiated work that your team should be working on? Open to any of you.
I'll take it.
You're doing that.
Yeah, we built so much from scratch because it didn't exist. We built data pipelining in a very specific way. Now, like a company like Datalogy is existing and trying to do what we're doing. We did our own training stack, but that's a specific thing that will be a differentiator for us. We're doing a whole bunch of fine tuning and reinforcement learning. We see companies that are emerging out and kind of doing this. It comes down to focus, like what will be the differentiator for us. And, if we think it's a core differentiator in the business, we'll focus on it. If we think it's just because it was a moment in time that it didn't exist, let's go pay somebody else money because it'll speed us up. Yeah. It's as simple as that. Now, the problem tends to be that people love their pet code names for projects. That's right. And so we have to continually reinforce it, which is it's not worth our time, it's not worth our energy. Remember, boulders, rocks, pebbles, sand. We're focused on the boulders and the rocks. And if we have the luxury of being the pebbles and the sand, we'll get there, but we got to focus on the boulders and the rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've gone through a journey where at each scale of the business, we've had to completely re-platform, and we get very married to a stack that we've optimized, a warehouse that we're working with, data pipelines that are running really well, and then a next bigger customer comes along, it breaks everything, and we have to completely re-platform. So I think it's just knowing that in this new world, you have to be dynamic, and your ability to roll with the punches and change and not be wedded to one solution is actually your best asset.
Well, I also don't know that StatSig necessarily would describe itself as a Gen AI company, but the impact of that and the effects on every company are pretty interesting. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so you're correct. We're not a Gen AI company yet. Potentially every company will be a Gen AI company in the future. Right. But we see the opportunity as kind of twofold. One, how do we empower developers who are building AI products to build better products? Mm-hmm. And two, how do we incorporate Gen AI ourselves into our product to further our vision? On the first, I think, LLMs have a number of parameters. These parameters are actually all ripe for experimentation, whether it's, the model itself or parameters like temperature or prompt. And while offline testing is kind of the standard in how models get built, once you actually deploy them in the real world, there's this concept of the context that it's operating in, and the end users, the humans that are using it, and their context. And that can change the performance of a given model. And so we've seen a number of our customers actually deploy, online experiments with their models in production to see, okay, if we use GPT 3.5 or GPT 4, which performs better? Does it matter, on different devices disproportionately or in different regions? And measuring that against real world metrics and benchmarking against things like cost or device performance or latency. And so we have a number of customers doing that, and we didn't really plan on that. It just started happening, and it was pretty cool. And so we're kind of doubling down on that and seeing where we can empower those customers more. On the second, how we incorporate Gen AI, I think this comes back to, or we think about it in terms of democratization. So, if you think about data, in the past you had to be a SQL wizard in order to access your data and mine it for insights. And with tools like Amplitude or Mixpanel or StatSig, increasingly you can be just a PM or an engineer and poke around with a few tools and get insights that inform what you build next. And the next step of that, if you just project that out, is not even needing to query and to know what questions to ask, but to have the tool actually tell you, hey, we've noticed that year over year, this data looks a little bit different. There's an anomaly here in this region. Maybe you should double click on that. Have it be conversational, where you can just say, I'm curious, how's the Mexican market performing, or how is my business in Brazil doing? And I think once you have a data set to build on top of, that's a huge opportunity. So we'll be exploring that in the future as well.
Yeah, good. Gustavo, that's one of the things you and I have actually talked about over the last few months, is just the amount of data that's out there and the amount of tools to access the data and the way people do it. There's a lot of inefficiency in the system, and I know you spend a lot of your time looking for the efficiencies in the system. How do you think about that?
Well, I think we're in a very privileged moment in time where during prior times, the answer to your question would be, we try to optimize things. We try to see what's broken, what could be improved, and we work on that. I think the reason we're so lucky right now is we can make problems go away in ways that we couldn't before. If you wanted to be an aviator in 1920, maybe you could aspire to it, but there wasn't going to be an opportunity for you to be a pilot. If you want to be a pilot today, you can go 2 miles that way and get an airplane and fly for a very low amount of money. So there's problems the world has, like this call center problem that I spent a lot of time thinking about, that for the last 30 years, you can try and make better. You can incrementally try and make better. And maybe you find some data and you learn something, you tweak. And now we're looking at making the problem go away once and for all, cure the problem. So I think we're very lucky because, and I think there's a fairly heavy investor audience, so it's very exciting that you get to invest in things that are no longer incrementally better, or a better mousetrap or something like that. You can find cures to these big problems. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very exciting opportunity.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways that I know you're doing that, and Vipul, you and your company especially are focused on customer choice, which is a shared value between our companies, and thinking about optionality and what that means. How do you balance being overwhelmed with choice with your internal teams and with the customers that you're working with, and maybe even need to provide prescriptive guidance in that situation?
Right. I think a particular approach, which is around open source and some extent decentralization of computing, what I think it's important for generative AI. Generative AI systems are both sort of function and form. There is both medium and message. The content is important. And we are, one of the things we're seeing, for instance, this was announced earlier this morning, the government of Bulgaria built a Bulgarian GPT model altogether, and they're serving it. And this one, and it's significantly better than any other model that exists out there for capturing the language and the culture. So we think that there is, because it is partly content, this choice is really important, and being able for companies and countries and cultures, different different sizes and at sort of different levels of capital investment, being able to build systems of their own and deploying them is important. It's hard work, to support different kinds of architectures, different levels of scale. But I think eventually it pays off because we don't think that the level of diversity in this is going to decrease over time.
I'm going to put you on the spot, and even at this conference, there's definitely a difference of opinion on whether closed models are more interesting, large models will commoditize over time. What's your point of view on open source versus closed models versus vertically integrated, and where do you see it going? And it depends is not a super interesting answer, so I'm going to challenge you.
I mean, I
push me on that.
I don't know if my answer is more interesting, but I say there is, in platform technologies, you do have closed and open systems coexist. You've seen this in operating systems, in databases. I think it's going to be similar here. There will be closed systems, there will be open systems. Our cost of building the models is reducing and part of that is just like learning how to build them more efficiently. So some of the frontier, I think, is today resides in the closed side. I actually believe eventually the frontier will move to open systems once we figure out how to pool the efforts of multiple parties in the ecosystem to build these models. We may find that the best models that we have are open or partially open.
Okay, good. That was an interesting answer. Good job. Thank you for that. Hey, Jason, the first time you and I met, we were both in Europe. That's not unusual for us. Your company has had to make some interesting choices along the way. Again, going back to Jamie and Mike Milken's conversation yesterday, there was a lot of talk about how do we think about democratization and what does that mean for immigration and where does the future of a lot of the things that are happening live? And right now, Paris and France are a hot spot. And I spent a lot of time with you and with Clement Hugging Face and the Mistral team, and just there's a global moment happening. Just maybe talk about some of the choices you've made, some of the different choices you've made.
Well, so I mean, I think you just mentioned three of the bigger companies that are quote unquote in France: Mistral, Hugging Face, and Poolside. A couple of blocks from each other there. I'm the only one that doesn't speak French natively, apparently, in those offices. When we think about building Poolside, we always thought about optimizing and making sure that we are making the best decisions we can in the moment. We're zigging when others are zagging. We're making unpopular or maybe kind of like unseen decisions because we're trying to figure out how to make sure that no matter what, a decade from now or 2 decades from now, we're not just around, but huge. And so you've got to figure out what those decisions are. So the easy decision is to start a Silicon Valley-based venture-backed company. Well, what's different about it? Like, what advantage do you have by doing that, but what disadvantages do you have? And that's how you just have to analyze it. So what we did is we inventoried the market. We said, we are going to raise X amount of dollars, raise $126 million as our seed round, which is a ridiculous seed round. It means nothing when you're competing for the exact same talent from OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, everybody else in the Bay Area who is going to be getting $1 million or $2 million plus salaries. Couldn't do it. So what is our zig when they're zagging? Well, we inventoried the world. Half the world's AI talent was in San Francisco. Half of the world's AI talent was in a corridor between London, Paris, and Zurich. And who were you competing for in that market? Well, at the time when we were being incorporated, Mistral and Poolside incorporated within 2 months of each other. So you're basically competing for DeepMind retaining its talent, Brain retaining its talent, and Fair retaining its talent. And that was a different decision. And you know, a lot of people might question it, but at the same time, you know, if you do the exact same thing as everybody else, you expect the exact same thing as everybody else.
Do you think companies have to come to the West Coast or Silicon Valley or New York to be successful in this field, or is that a GTM motion now as opposed to a research motion?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, you're again, going back into different things that you're going to optimize for. I think like the more interesting thing that you can do for any company is figure out your go-to-market. And I think a lot of people spend too much time on the idea before they even get to the product. But then you spend way too much time on the product before you talk to a customer. Then you maybe talk to like a set of customers before you figure out how you get it to the customers and get it in their hands. And so you've got to think about all those things if you're going to build a great company, not just an experiment. And you know, I've never lived in San Francisco. I'm the CTO of GitHub, effectively CTO at Heroku, and then I ran Ubuntu for 5 years. I never lived once in San Francisco. People look at that and say, well, what could you have done if you lived in San Francisco? I'm like, I'm more amazed that I didn't live in San Francisco and was able to do this. And I think that's the orientation you want to take. So what can you do if you take a different decision?
It also shows good judgment.
You ask some folks, ask my wife, she says I make bad decisions all the time.
That's great. Well, we're going to move to maybe some closing thoughts from each of you. And given the mix of the audience here, we have a large portion of investors. Maybe as you give closing thoughts, a question that they should be asking the next wave of companies that are coming up that's maybe different than the questions that got asked last year. One of my favorite sayings on the GTM front, Matt at Madrona, I don't know if Matt's in the room, but a few weeks ago he got asked, hey, what's the most important model? Is it Anthropic? Is it OpenAI? Whatever the model is, ChatGPT-4. And his answer I really love, but I'm biased, which is the business model is the most important model. And I think that's especially true when a lot of the companies today are being founded by researchers and technologists. Yeah. Okay, closing thoughts. We're just going to go down the line. Vipul, we'll start with you.
I think we're very, very early in this, and we're going to see some amazing things coming up, and you know, amazing companies being formed. And I would sort of, you know, for the investor audience, I would look at what's on the edge of possible right now, and I think that's super interesting.
Great, Margaret Ann.
Yeah, I joined one of the AI panels earlier and was listening in, and one of the quotes that struck me was, it's not, similar to what you were just saying, it's not the model that actually matters, it's the use case and like the end customer change in their life that you're enabling that matters, and the businesses that get built that change people's lives and make an impact are gonna matter much, much more than the underlying model or tech. And I think that's just the right way to think about the AI space, like not, you know, what is kind of changing from a technology stack perspective, but what are the new use cases that are being opened up? What are we able to do now? How are people's lives better now because this exists than before it existed? So I think that's where I'm focused. Maybe that's my product background, but focus on the customer.
Thank you. Gustavo.
My quick thoughts, just great, lucky time to be bold and think about doing things that previously were not possible and to not think incrementally.
And in terms of what investors should be asking the next wave of companies and founders coming up, what are your thoughts there?
Well, if you think about SaaS, it's all been incremental. There was V1 SaaS, and then there was V2, and it maybe went from on-prem to cloud, or nicer UIs, or more features. But in terms of what the workflows were fairly similar. And in our world, in call center, if you went from Siebel to Salesforce, kind of nothing changed. Now you can change it. Now you can make that user of that software disappear. Mm-hmm. That's a bold proposition, and I think that's going to happen throughout the entire landscape, not just in our space.
Okay, great. Jason, bring us home.
I think this is this is probably the most unique time in any of our lives we're going to see. I think we're seeing a transformation. I happen to be one of those people who puts this more akin to like the introduction of electricity into the world. And what excites me about that is there's a direct line between introduction of electricity and us going to the moon, but that's a second and third order effect that you can't see until you've been through it. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, I think we're going to have that one of those moments. We don't know what the second and third order effects are going to be here, but what are they going to unlock when we're basically able to, once we get to your infinite compute, as we've talked about, you're going to have an intelligence layer, almost a free compute layer, a fast one, and then if we figure out the energy component, I mean, holy shit. Those three things together are coming together pretty quickly here.
Yeah.
By the way, when's the nuclear power center coming online in Pennsylvania?
With this, I think this is being recorded or live streamed, so we'll take that one offline. So thank you, Jamie. Thank you, team, for the invitation. Really amazing to talk to the founders and teams here changing the world. Big round of applause for the panelists. Thank you.